People relate to photographs by looking through them, at what's in them, and not at them as pictures. And it takes a slightly different shift of attention to realize you're looking at something, not necessarily through it. Because the camera creates such a beautiful illusion, and the illusion is so similar to the way we see with our eyes, it seems as though we're looking through the surface at things. So people tend to relate to photographs by looking at what's in them and saying what's going on, and they might get frustrated if they immediately can't recognize what's going on, like they can recognize what's going on in the news. So a picture, has this phenomenon, this character that it seems to disclose an actuality very simply, but it is not that simple. Most people think that photographs are simple because they're accompanied by a lot of description, verbal. Take away the verbal description, you get into the pure picture, then you have to relate to it as a poem. When I look at my work and I think about who I might have been because I made it, I feel I'm very observant. I think that I am a kind of person who's quite happy to participate a little bit in things, but not unhappy to be able to find a point of view where I can see things happening rather than jumping into the middle of them myself, even though I do that too sometimes. So I think that one of the main qualities is observantness, observancy. Not quite sure what the English word is. And I guess that's also, a photographer's nature, is to be observant, or maybe just any artist who has to deal with the world as it appears, and trying to deal with its appearance, is observant. And I feel also that picture making of any kind, photography or drawing or even sculpture, painting, expresses something of a kind of acceptance of the way things are. Not for everyone and not the same way, but I have a feeling I'm sort of an accepting person in that I'm glad all these things have existed and allowed me to see them or shown themselves to me. So, I think there are other elements that come into play in terms of the activity of making that also bring out other aspects of a person's character. But those come behind, in a way, the sense of observing and liking the appearance of things. I love the appearance of a tree or a face or a sidewalk. I just like the way they look. I get enjoyment just from seeing them and seeing them maybe in this light and then in that light. So I think that's pretty basic for me. Some experiences seem to reveal to me, surprisingly, a kind of a picture that I wouldn't have thought of making until I had that experience. So essentially, I'm always looking for that, but I can't look for it very actively because, searching about doesn't really help. So you just have to be sort of receptive a bit, like some sort of predatory creature like an octopus who doesn't run around in the ocean capturing things because he's too vulnerable himself. He stays in a corner and observes the flow past him in a very, aware way, and then he gets something. It's more like that. There's a flow that one's in, and occurrences come at you, or you find yourself at them, and some of those surprise you or surprise me, and the surprise is a kind of disclosure, I think I would say, a revealing of a potential for something I didn't know I wanted to do. It doesn't mean necessarily that I have a super emotional response to the situation, and I wouldn't claim that, but I do have a super emotional response to the possibility. And so that stays with me. And then if I really feel I can do something, then I set to work and I do my work. But these things just happen always by accident, always without plan. I can't plan ahead. And I guess the fortunate thing is that life keeps happening. So things keep appearing, things keep coming at me. Once in a while, that thing happens, and luckily enough, it happens frequently enough that I can usually find something to do. I've noticed over time that photographs either record an occurrence, like one of my pictures where something human is happening, let's call it an occurrence, or they are made in the absence of an occurrence. So it might just be a place. You can see in this room occurrences and non-occurrences. And it seems to me that in terms of photography, both are equal. Photography is quite happy to record an occurrence, and photography, this entity, is quite happy to record another thing where there is no occurrence. Both of those things happen because photography occurs. So photography must happen, and it itself is a happening. It is something that happens. So there's always a happening of something that takes place, and what the camera sees may be either of the two. The difference between them is always sort of conditional, because both equally lead to interesting pictures. What the meaning is of course specific to each one. So I actually don't see absence in that sense. I see the equal conditioning of these kind of images, and in another sense, they're just different types of picture. Firstly, the snapshot is a kind of photography that has become identified as the most characteristic kind of photograph that exists. And that's widely believed. And I think it's quite true. That is, that the camera as a mechanism can be set off quickly by anyone at any time. And that's, in a way, its nature. So what we call a snapshot, which is usually a picture taken quickly without any preparation, without any organization, and without any collaboration, is the fundamental type of photograph. And all other kinds of photographs have to relate to that in some way. They don't have to be it, and they don't have to agree with it, but they have to relate in some way. And I see a lot of my pictures as contemplations of the nature of that characteristic. They're not it, but they contemplate it. And so a lot of those pictures, those kind of pictures, I call near-documentary photographs, because they are near to documentary. They sort of look like they could be snapshots. They resemble many of the things that snapshots have, but they are not snapshots. And they're, the reasons why I do it that way, I can't explain briefly, but it's a lot to do with my feeling that one of the most interesting aspects of art, any of the arts, is composition, of making, the making process. And the making process itself creates new things that happen in its process of being made. And when I work on my pictures, I start somewhere, and as I work on them, and I often work on them for quite a while, that is some days or some weeks, they keep changing, and they change. The nature of the picture changes, what's in it changes, the way it looks changes, the external world changes, the weather changes, etc., etc. And the picture goes along and becomes something that is different than from where it started. And that's just an artistic aspect of making, of creating, that I enjoy. And I enjoy it enough that it kind of changed my relation to photography, because I found that when I did go out and photograph spontaneously, which I have done, I wasn't artistically really satisfied myself. It didn't give me enough enjoyment, and my own enjoyment is important to me. It's what I do. So I remember thinking, you have to be yourself, and that means you have to follow what you want to do and see if that actually has a place in the art form. And I believe it does, because I feel like I've made some pictures that people like, and I can accept as works that I'll stand behind. And in the process, it sort of changed my relation to photography. So pictures of occurrences, as I was mentioning before, can have any nature. There's no rules, no limitations. But the way, the degree to which they might resemble a candid photograph is a kind of line of comparison that is always useful. And I use that line of comparison quite often. I don't conform to it, I don't obey it, but I refer to it. So my pictures all, or let's say almost all, have this relation to this normative center of photography, even though I believe that photography is bigger than its center. Concrete ball is almost a snapshot, in fact, because first of all, it was taken very quickly. On that particular day, it was raining. It's not when it's raining, you can get your camera all wet and so on. So I worked, and I can work very quickly. I mean, I often work slowly, but I can work quickly. And that particular picture was executed rather quickly, maybe in less than 20 minutes. And but I knew the place. I was aware of it, and I knew I wanted to make that picture. And it is, I wouldn't call it a snapshot, because a snapshot usually means something captured quickly while it's happening. But here you see, of course, there is no occurrence. There's simply a place and an arrangement of shapes and forms that I saw and felt that from this particular point where the camera is, became a composition that had in it the kind of qualities I think a picture should have. So I liked, very much the relationship of shapes between them. So there is something called photographic seeing, I think, that has been talked about for decades, that photographers do get to get the experience of being able to preview almost in their mind's eye what that place is going to look like as a picture. They can do it, and I think I can do that too. And I could see that set of circumstances back there resolving itself inside of the four sides of my viewer as a picture. And so that was not, that did not take a lot of labor. It was done very much as what we would call straight photography. And I've always done straight photography. And in the exhibition there's several examples of it. Most of the time the straight photography doesn't involve people, but there are exceptions to that too. Because when you're working with people, of course, you're working quickly and you're trying to capture something, and I'm not keen on that. But I like to go out and take pictures of places if they seem like the kind of place that's going to give me something. So at that point, in this particular example, it was easy. I could see it in the camera. I knew it was done, as long as I made the exposure properly. On other pictures, and there are many other pictures in the show that are made up of more than one negative, they're essentially photo montages. And then the act of composition is more laborious. I wouldn't say more complicated, but it's more laborious. And you need to actually do work until you find things that finally look right. So, you know, for example, here there's a picture overpass, which maybe you can show, and I photographed it with the collaboration of those people, and we worked on it for quite a while, even though all they're doing is just walking along. But 4 people walking along form a shape, and I can judge the nature of that shape in the overall composition of my picture as it goes along, and that can be work, that can take time. And you know, I had to ask them to walk many times, but they only just walked. But as we worked, the weather changed, the sky changed. You notice it's a very striking sky. This happened by accident one day, and that became available as part of the montage. And as we were photographing, many vehicles were coming along the street, and finally I noticed this big white truck that you see at the side of the picture, which is very important to the overall composition. Now, all these things that happen are just actual things: trucks driving by, clouds changing, light changing, shadows moving, and people walking. They're all facts. The fact that those people were walking along by my direction means, of course, they were performing, but their only performance was to walk along the sidewalk. And I just had to find a way to capture their movement, their legs, their arms, in a way that made the picture work for me. So there I have to see things, take things out and put things in, as if I painted it in, then painted it out, then tried another figure. In that sense, there's a kind of painterly quality to it, where you are making decisions, trying different things, and coming up with something that, of course, is artistically satisfying as a picture, and at the same time feels really like the event is taking place, and it is like, in a way, like life, and therefore does resemble a candid photo. And I think Overpass does really resemble a candid photo, and it's the outcome of those decisions. But to know when it's finished, you know, depends also on the elements that you're working with. Sometimes you're working with very few, like with a concrete ball, just one image. Just get the camera in the right place at the right time, and you've got the picture. Or here, a whole different layer of things have to get done. I would have worked in front of the Real Club if I could have, because there was nothing wrong with it. Its appearance was just as I wanted it. But there was no practical way to accomplish what I wanted to do. There was simply no possibility of doing it. It's the middle of a busy street, and I had to work there for many days. I suppose it would have been possible if I wanted to do it all in one night, that maybe I could have got a permit and photographed it in one night, but I didn't even try to do that because I knew that I could never finish it in one night, so what would be the point? And so my alternative at that point was either you find a different club or you're going to have to make a copy. It's not something I really want to do, but I wanted to make that picture. And I wanted that place because I loved the shapes, colors, the nature of the portico, and just the architecture did something for me, and I just wanted it. The nightclub picture is, in a way, one of the ones that took a lot of preparing and working. Another one here in this room is the flooded grave, which was just as difficult. once in a while, I get the taste for doing something that's technically difficult just because it's challenging and interesting. Certain kinds of pictures, I mean, all my pictures are rather difficult for me, but some of them are technically easier. Photographing outdoors in sunshine can be a lot simpler than photographing somewhere which needs a lot of lighting or something. Sometimes I get interested in just technical problems. But in the case of the nightclub, I found this particular nightclub whose architecture and color and form I really found interesting, and I wanted to photograph the subject of the man who sells roses on the street during nights when people are out clubbing and they want to buy a rose for their girlfriend or something, and you see these people who do that. And I found that was the original subject of the picture, was the person who's within the crowd but he's not celebrating, he's trying to earn some small living out of it, and he's really separate in mood from the surrounding. And as I thought about him, and as I began to try and find a way to do a subject based on him, I realized that the picture had to become wider and bigger so he would be placed in the world of movement and all the people who were ignoring him. And so I had searched, I'd gone and looked at a lot of clubs where this kind of thing happens in Vancouver, and I picked this one. And as I worked on it, I realized, of course, I could not use the actual club for the practical, because the practical obstacles of working in that area with the traffic and the people and the permits, and it was just impossible. So because I've decided that I am allowed to do what I have to do to make my pictures, and that's sort of what I call cinematography. What I learned from the cinema is that there is no single way to create a very realistic image. You can go to the real places, or you can create replicas if necessary. And it all depends on the quality of the replication. So I was sort of forced into the situation of having to rebuild this front of this club, the sidewalk and the street in a studio. And I consider that a sort of artifice made necessary by circumstances, not necessarily a value in itself, in the sense that I don't think it adds any uniqueness or artistic distinction to the picture to have done that. In fact, I would prefer that most people wouldn't even notice it. I was hesitant to even tell people that I'd done that, but it got out, so now it's just part of the story. And that construction allowed me to work with the people I wanted to work with in I would think even more natural way, because I wouldn't have had to deal with all the things I would have had to deal with in the street. So that kind of freed me up to just work with the people to make the crowd scene as it ended up being done. That's a kind of artifice that I think also, in this case, should become invisible. I would like it if people either didn't know that that was done like that, or if they do know it, realize that it's interesting but not very important. As I said in a talk last night, a very accurate replica of a place itself has a documentary quality. It's a kind of a document, like a very accurate copy of the place. And then the photograph that contains that document, then itself, in a very slightly removed way, has itself a kind of documentary quality, in that it's still recording an accurate something. And so, for all these kind of things, I've found that the notion of document or truth is complex in photography. I might be over-complexifying it by my own way of getting involved, but I feel that way of getting involved does have a lot to do with the way I really feel photography works. I don't think I'm complicating it for any exterior reason. First of all, in relation to any relation I might have to specific earlier artworks that might show up somehow in my own work. Occasionally I have done a picture that refers to an older work. And that's not really because I'm an art historian or anything, because I'm not an art historian. I just went to school and studied those things because I wanted to learn more about them. It's because that particular artwork struck me in a certain way, just the way an experience in the street would have struck me. So I consider that just another accident of my everyday life, and doesn't have a status different from any other source. So in this exhibition, there are two pictures derived from scenes from books I was reading. The one After Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and the other After Spring Snow by Yukio Mishima. And those arose because of what I call accident of reading. If I was walking in the street and saw the four people who you see in overpass, and I did see them on the sidewalk in a place very near where the picture was taken, that was an accident. I hadn't planned to meet them. And when I was reading Invisible Man, I didn't plan to notice this scene, but it had the same effect on me as did seeing the four people. It showed me a picture I could do. So that relationship is very explicit. It tells you, the picture tells you, this is after Ellison. And if I've done a couple of pictures like the Sudden Gust of Wind from a few years before this show should start, after a woodblock print by Hokusai, it's because I was looking at a book of Hokusai in a bookstore and suddenly saw this image. It was equally accidental. So I see these accidents as just arising from my everyday life, and my everyday life does involve things besides walking around. It involves talking to people, listening to music, reading books, etc. And any of those things can set off a starting point. When I have used a work, I've used it very explicitly. But otherwise, that's not my relation to the art of the past. The art of the past is, for me anyway, not the art of the past. For me, it's always the art of now. I'm appreciating it now, it's now. So I don't believe in old art. I mean, I know the art is old, but I don't believe in the concept of old art. I think that good art and art that strikes you is always happening in the present. So it's always available to me in some way. And it's influencing me, like it influences most artists in some indirect, unpredictable ways that that you may not even be aware of until later. So my whole formation of my taste and my judgment about art is caused by my relation to all these things. That plays a role, and it blends in some indefinable blend with actual experience. So to go back to the question of truth, it's a very difficult thing to define. I think art deals with feelings and deals with aesthetic experience, and also deals with a judgment of the artwork that you make while you're enjoying it. And we all say to ourselves, I love that piece, it's good. Or I love that piece means I think it's good. And if it's good and if you enjoy it, then the subject is coming through to you in some emotional way. If it's showing you something in the world, and it feels like the world, and it feels like the artist has grasped something about the way his world looks, and it feels right, then, and it feels true in some way, feels true to your own experience, feels true to your own judgment, then it has to have some authenticity to it. And I think that's about as decisive as you can be. There's a kind of sense of, why does poetry feel true? Because it feels that way. He's caught the right words for that subject, whatever it was. You feel it, you get it, and you love to read it, and you love the sound of it, and it all constitutes something, at least something valuable, if not definitively true. It's a, truth is a little too hard a term for art, strictly speaking. Pictures can't tell stories because they are still. So they step away from the flow of time, and they step away from what we do with time, which is narrate. Because humans are always talking and telling themselves stories. That's how the mind deals with time, But pictures are unique in that they step away from that by nature, because they can't do that. They can only give you a pattern that is recognizable as an image, that is excerpted from that narrative and cancels it out. But everything in that picture suggests its narrativity, but it cannot give it to you. So when you are experiencing the picture as a picture, and you're really enjoying it, let's say it's a good picture and you're really having a good experience, I believe that you, the viewer, then are writing it. You're writing the story. You may not be consciously writing it in a literary way, but you're sensing the before and the after, and you're probably connecting it to your own memories and associations and so on. And if you wanted to be formal about it, you might write it, and that might become art criticism. The viewer comes from his life with all his practical concerns and his desires and his attitudes and his role as a citizen. He or she comes to the art, experiences it in the way we were just talking about, that is, has an intense experience, aesthetic experience, and in that experience changes probably, or experiences differently, his or her relation to the subject. So let's say, I keep to the same example, overpass, because it's in front of me. These are nomads, people who don't have a fixed place. They're the kind of people who are having hard times. They're not fortunate. They're exposed to difficulties that most people can avoid. That gives their lives a kind of drama that, is fascinating. It gives rise to a lot of attitudes toward those people. In the picture, the qualities of the picture will come through to the viewer, and let's imagine, to simplify, that the relation of the viewer to that theme is shifted because of the enjoyment of the picture. So what that means is you've built a new relation to that subject. Let's call it nomads for the moment. Maybe when you leave the museum, you take away the experience with you back to your practical life. You don't know it's not sure what happened, but it may be that the very notion of nomadism, if you want to think about that, will have been altered slightly by the pleasure that you felt, that then did something to your attitude, your social attitude. It can't be legislated or fixed or even defined, or you might not even be aware of it. But I believe that art does that to us, and that it actually it filters back into the practical world. And I think most artists hope that would create a more free-minded, more sympathetic, more empathetic relation to other people and to the world and to problems. And that actually may change your attitude as a citizen. Not drastically, probably, but effectively, and probably slowly, and it depends on the accumulation of such experiences. So I think art does do something. It just doesn't do it very systematically. It can't be legislated. It's pretty hard to control. You can't organize it. But because we have art in our culture and people are enjoying it, it probably is having an effect on our civilization and our attitude toward other people. You know, I think that if we thought back to the history of modern art, which is, say, 100, 150 years ago, old now, and this is just the modern period, it's probably true that the presence of modern art and literature has had an enormous effect on social attitudes. It just accumulates slowly and indirectly, and it's hard to measure. But for example, 100 years ago, 1915, let's say, or 1900, a lot of modern art that we now think of as full of positive values was hated by the public, and not only by the mass public, but by the connoisseur public. It was hated because it did contravene rather conventional values of the modern world of 1900, which was probably a more authoritarian world than we live in today. So public attitudes have changed a lot because of education and so on, and the spread of democracies and all that, but the arts have had a huge role to play in that, in the shaping of the sensibility. You know, the ability to see people as much more unique than maybe once was appreciated socially has got a lot to do with the novel, with poetry, and with the visual arts. It does these things, but it only does it, to me, by just being itself. It's not very good. The arts aren't very good as a program for such a thing. They just work when they work. But I think that artists believe that their work has some sort of humanizing aspect. And I don't think that they're terribly idealistic about it or terribly optimistic about its power, but on the other hand, it seems to be an actual presence.